Have you ever called your toddler 3 times and they act like they didn't hear you? You call their name, nothing. You ask them to come over, nothing. Then you say it again, a little louder. And suddenly you're wondering, why are you ignoring me? It can feel personal. It can feel like they're testing you. And after the 5th reminder, it can even feel like your toddler is deliberately refusing to listen. But here's the surprising part. Sometimes, your toddler isn't ignoring you in the way you think. What looks like defiance can actually involve something much more complicated. Attention, developing self-control, working memory, emotional state, and the difficult skill of switching from one thing to another. And once you understand what's happening underneath that behavior, the way you respond can change completely. Imagine you're completely focused on something. You're watching a movie. You're reading something interesting. You're talking to someone. And suddenly, someone interrupts you and says, "Stop what you're doing. Come here." You heard them, but you don't immediately move. You need a moment to switch gears. For a toddler, that transition can be much harder. The brain systems involved in focusing attention, holding information in mind, controlling impulses, and switching between tasks are still developing throughout childhood. So when your toddler is deeply involved in building a tower, looking at a book, playing with a toy, or watching something fascinating, your voice may not instantly become the most important thing in their world. They may hear you, but their attention is still somewhere else. That distinction matters, because hearing you and immediately acting on what you said are 2 different skills. When an adult says, "Put your shoes on and come downstairs," we automatically break that sentence into a sequence. Shoes, then downstairs, then whatever comes next. A toddler may not process the instruction with the same efficiency. Their working memory is still developing. Working memory is the ability to hold information in your mind while using it. For a young child, even a simple instruction can compete with everything else happening around them. The toy they're holding, the sound in the room, the thought they just had, the emotion they're feeling, the activity they don't want to stop. So when you say, "Come here," and nothing happens, it doesn't automatically mean, "I refuse to obey." Sometimes the child simply hasn't successfully shifted from what they were doing to what you were asking them to do. But there's another layer. Toddlers are also becoming increasingly independent. They are discovering that they are separate people. They can choose, they can refuse, they can decide where to go, what to touch, what to eat, and sometimes whether they want to cooperate. This is one reason toddler behavior can suddenly seem more oppositional. Your child isn't simply learning what the world expects. They're also discovering, "I have a say in what happens to me." That doesn't mean every refusal is healthy independence. It means that the desire for autonomy is part of normal development. And when an adult says, "Come here right now," a toddler may experience that request not only as information, but as a sudden loss of control. That can make resistance much stronger. This is where many parents get trapped. You ask once, nothing happens. You ask again, nothing. So you ask louder, then again. Then you start counting. 1, 2, 3, and eventually the child moves. The problem is that this can accidentally teach a pattern. the toddler learns that the first request doesn't necessarily require action. The real signal becomes the fifth request, the louder voice, or the moment the parent becomes visibly frustrated. That doesn't mean parents are doing something wrong on purpose. It's simply how patterns can develop. And it is one reason consistency matters. If a request is important, giving your child a clear instruction and following through calmly can be more useful than repeating the same sentence 10 times.
There's a simple difference between saying something to a child and actually getting their attention. Imagine you're standing across the room while your toddler is completely absorbed in a game. You say, "Come here." They don't respond. Now imagine walking closer, getting down near their level, saying their name, making sure they're looking toward you, and then giving the instruction. The message is completely different. You're no longer competing with the entire room for their attention. You're helping them shift their attention toward you. That doesn't guarantee instant cooperation, but it removes one major obstacle. You've actually connected before asking for action. The American Academy of Pediatrics also emphasizes active listening and giving a child your full attention during communication. Another common mistake is giving toddlers a long explanation at exactly the moment you need them to act. "Okay, we have to go now because we're going to be late and you need to get your shoes and then we're going to the car." For an adult, that's perfectly understandable. For a toddler, that's a lot of information. A shorter instruction is easier to hold on to. Shoes on. Then, once that is done, let's go. This isn't about treating toddlers like they can't understand language. It's about matching the amount of information to the skills they're still developing. Harvard's research on executive function describes working memory, attention, and cognitive flexibility as developing capacities rather than abilities children simply possess at full strength from the beginning.
There's another possibility parents often overlook. Your toddler may be tired, hungry, overstimulated, upset, excited, or already struggling with a difficult transition. And when emotional arousal rises, using self-control becomes harder. Think about your own behavior when you're exhausted. You know what you should do, but doing it can suddenly feel much harder. For a toddler whose self-regulation skills are still developing, that effect can be even more noticeable. So sometimes the question isn't, "Why won't my child listen?" It's, "What is making it difficult for my child to respond right now?" That small change in perspective can completely change the interaction. If a toddler is fighting for independence, giving them a tiny amount of appropriate control can sometimes reduce the battle. Instead of, "Put your shoes on now," you might say, "Do you want the blue shoes or the red shoes?" The goal isn't to negotiate every instruction. Some things aren't choices. But when a choice genuinely exists, allowing the child to participate can give them a sense of autonomy while still moving toward the goal. They're not deciding whether the family leaves the house. They're deciding something small within the boundary. That distinction matters. The adult keeps the structure. The child gets a little room to participate. Every one of these everyday moments is teaching something. When you calmly get their attention, you're helping them practice attention. When you give a simple instruction, you're giving them a manageable task. When you allow an appropriate choice, you're giving them practice with independence. When you calmly repeat a boundary, you're showing them that limits can be predictable. And when you help them transition, instead of simply demanding instant obedience, you're giving them practice with something their developing brain will need for years: switching gears. These skills don't appear overnight. They develop through repeated experiences, relationships,
practice and support. Harvard's Center on the Developing Child describes adults as providing scaffolding that helps children use emerging executive function skills before gradually doing more independently.
So the next time you call your toddler and they don't respond, before assuming they're ignoring me, pause for a second. Ask yourself, did I actually get their attention? Was the instruction simple enough? Were they deeply involved in something? Are they tired, hungry, or overwhelmed? Are they struggling with the transition? Or are they simply testing their growing independence? Sometimes, yes, toddlers can absolutely refuse to cooperate. They can test boundaries, they can say no, they can deliberately walk away. But the important point is that not every moment of non-response means the same thing. A toddler who doesn't respond because they're absorbed in play is different from a toddler who refuses because they want control.
A tired toddler is different from an overstimulated toddler. A child who doesn't understand a complicated instruction is different from a child who understands it and simply doesn't want to do it. The behavior may look identical from across the room, but the reason underneath it can be completely different. And that is why understanding the psychology matters. So the next time your toddler doesn't respond immediately, you don't have to choose between being permissive and being strict. You can keep the boundary while also trying to understand what is making the boundary difficult to follow. Because the goal isn't simply to make your child obey in that moment. The goal is to help them gradually develop the skills that will eventually allow them to listen, shift their attention, manage their emotions, and cooperate more independently.
The goal isn't to let toddlers do whatever they want, and it isn't to avoid boundaries. It's to understand what their developing brain can realistically handle, and then give them the structure and support they need to succeed. Because sometimes, the toddler who looks like they're ignoring you is actually a toddler whose brain is still learning one of the hardest skills of childhood. Stop what you're doing, shift your attention, remember what's being asked, control your impulse, and do something different. And that skill doesn't appear because we demand it. It develops gradually, one everyday interaction at a time.
If you want more videos explaining the hidden psychology behind everyday child behavior, subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the behavior that frustrates parents the most is also the behavior that tells us the most about how a child's brain is developing.